Here, just getting last minute materials. Is our recording device on here?
Yep.
Yep, we're good. Okay. First order of business be to accept and adopt the agenda. Do I have a motion? All in favor? Aye. All right, next item on the agenda is approval of minutes. We have a Monica, you want to talk about these November 2nd?
Absolutely. There was a small error when we did the November 2nd minutes that we needed to correct, so we needed you to just reapprove it. The error was that we, in referencing the transcript, we said the full transcript, but we only attached certain pages of the transcript. So we had to go back and make that revision to say excerpt of the transcript, so that it would be specific as to what we were attaching. So what you see there is, and that was on page 2. B, treasurer's letter. It says following is a brief synopsis of the discussion relative to the treasurer's letter dated October 11, 2012 regarding fiscal year 2012 audit of SCRS. And then the next sentence is where we made a correction. It says, due to the nature and sensitivity of this topic, the discussion was very in-depth and lengthy. See pages 16 to 56 of the excerpted transcriber recording. So that's the change that we made, is the excerpted transcriber
full
recording.
transcript.
As versus the full transcript.
I move we amend it.
All right, so I have a motion. Do I have a second? Second, all in favor?
Aye.
All right, so do I have a, now I need a motion to approve, or I guess reapprove the November minutes, because we've already approved them once, so they've now been amended. So I guess we
approve amendment.
Okay, all in favor? All right, then also in your pack is the February 12th minutes. These were posted, correct, on the audit site?
No, we were in.
So this is the first time they've seen. So these are the first time y'all have seen them. So you know, don't if you want to take a minute, there aren't that many. If you want to read through them, or if we want to carry them over, whatever the preference. But I'm inclined to just take a few minutes and read them. If that's
Well, and that's up to y'all. I, of course, wasn't participating in that
Right.
meeting, so.
I read them while we were waiting.
all right. Do I have a motion?
So moved.
All in favor?
Aye.
And would you like to abstain since you
Yeah, I'll
weren't at the meeting?
abstain.
Okay. So we're going to record that as one abstention and approval. All right, with that, I'll turn it over to Andrew.
I'm going to give a very brief departmental update and then hand it off to Monica, who will go into detail regarding our updated audit plan, which we gave you guys an update on last meeting, obviously we made some significant progress, but we still have a resource issue which we'll address. In regards to departmental update, things are very busy, lots of special projects, consulting projects. Clifton Larson Allen actually began interim work, so we've been sitting in on some of those meetings. The fiduciary audit is still in discussion and doing planning for that. We are not sure if we're going to obtain funding with it, but we're staying in close contact with the IG's office to ensure that the funding is obtained, that we are ready to go. Now I will hand off to Monica for the audit update.
Okay. At the meeting on February 12th, we talked about the audit plan and the need to make revisions to it based upon resource constraints. And so we did our best to try to obtain resources through several different mechanisms, one of which was to utilize the procurements that are currently in place with the state that yielded no real viable options for us. Then we tried to utilize the ability to hire on a temporary or part-time employee. We did get some really good candidates. Unfortunately, the one that we extended the offer to actually rescinded his acceptance due to some of the just what's going on in the news. He declined the offer based upon that. So we are probably, I guess, another month in. We have 1 month left really to the fiscal year end. So we've done a combination of things. We have continued to search for assets or resources. We have identified one resource who will be available definitely June 1st. She's freeing up June 1st on an assignment. She's a contract worker by nature. So she's freeing up June. She's trying to get free a little bit sooner than that because she realizes that we have some deadlines that we're trying to meet for that June 31st deadline. So we'll keep you abreast on that, on how that goes. An offer has not been extended to her, but we just did get a commitment from her yesterday that she would take on the assignment. So we're really pleased about that. We still needed to make adjustments to the plan because we had a month and a half loss in trying to procure the resources in time. So what we've done is we've updated the plan as per your request. We made some revisions, and we actually have anything in red that you see is what we've updated. So what you see here is you have the plan is what you agreed or approved back in November. The revised plan is what we're actually saying we're going to revise the plan to, we're requesting that you approve today. And we're giving you our year-to-date actuals and then also what remains for fiscal year 13. What you'll notice is that there are several items, 2 of them and particularly that are highlighted in orange. We're actually requesting that you approve us amending the plan to remove these items. They are moderate in terms of risk, and we amongst ourselves gave some consideration and some thought to it and didn't think the organization would be placed at considerable risk if we did not do these for fiscal year 2013. Does not mean that when we do our plan for fiscal year 2014 that these items would not be on that plan, but to meet the resource constraints that we currently have, we thought these were the best 2 items to kind of peel off the plan and still be able to get the rest of the plan work done. Of course, this is also saying that we get an asset. So if you look down at the bottom, and you see highlighted there, fiscal year, remaining fiscal year hours, total 489 hours. There's actually a total of about 300 work hours for Andrew and I available. That additional 189 represents that resource we're talking about. So we're still going to try to get the resource in here and get the most critical items, i.e. the ones with high risk, done. And we think we should be able to do that if we can secure that resource. So let's talk about the revisions. What you'll see in red, just go up first, is that for the valuation of investments, audit. We actually have pared that down based upon some of the work that we've already done. We think we won't need 100 hours. We think we can utilize 80 hours to get that started. But we did actually have to bump up the fees work from 160, the contracts and contract compliance work from 160 to 200 hours. And that's just based upon a recent review that Andrew did of one contract. It led us to see the amount of depth and breadth of work that the scope would be greater than what we anticipated. So we bumped that up about 200 to 200 hours, which is an increase of about 40 hours. And then Andrew will have some more. So then we also have the management fees and expenses. And we took that down, we brought that up, 100 to 180 hours for the same reason. Those two audits kind of tangent off one another. We will be covering to some extent the contractual fee basis in the contract compliance audit for the strategic partnership. So we should be able to leverage some of that work when we do the management fees and expenses, or vice versa, whichever one we do first. If you just slide over a little bit to your left, Andrew. Okay, you'll see that there's a project that we placed on hold. Now, everything else is in a green state, meaning that we pretty much either complete in progress on time. The one that's on hold is pending, and I want to bring your attention to that one because it is the AIP compliance, and it's on hold based upon the, it's the AIP compliance. And that's on hold based upon the approval of the new plan. So what we are currently contemplating is whether or not it makes sense to do a backward look or to do a forward look. If we decide to do a forward look, this would actually be pushed out, but currently is on hold, awaiting the final approval of the AIP by the commission, so that we can really determine whether or not it makes sense to do the backward look or the forward look.
We did approve that.
It's been
It's
approved.
been approved.
Yeah.
I was final
Final
revisions,
revisions.
final revisions. that
What
need
would
to
be the
done.
value of doing a backward look versus, it seems to me like a forward.
Well, it's just
look.
regulatory. It's the regulatory said you should have been in compliance. And we've done kind of, Andrew did a very high level look. And it's, from his high level look, it looks like you were in compliance. We didn't do a detailed dive. But I think one of the concerns with the SIOP and AIP was whether or not they were written in such a manner to really say that they were being complied with versus it was being more of a
Handbook for best practices.
handbook for best practices. So we really wanted to make sure that when we audit them, that they understand that we're gonna say, this is what you said you did you do this? And that just is a different change in thought process as to how these documents were used in the past. So now forward looking, they are exactly what they're doing or what they plan to do, and henceforth we can hold them to that when we're going in and we're saying, did you comply not only with the regulatory statutes, but also with what you said you were going to do. So it'll give us a better, a more concrete feel for really truly how management is executing on their plan versus before.
Yeah, I don't feel like I know enough to make this
Yeah,
decision.
we're going to work with management. We're going to talk it
merits.
through with management to see
Yeah,
what
I
makes
see.
sense.
Okay.
Yeah, so I just wanted to bring that to your attention, that that is on hold for that reason. And so we may move that because we won't have enough runway to do the current one this year. You have to have at least 3 quarters because it's a quarter, there's some quarterly things that have to be done in that. So you have to have at least 3 quarters worth of work before you can even test it to know whether or not it's operating the way they say that it should. So just wanted to bring that to your attention. But everything else is in a green state. That which is in the yellow state that says not started is yellow because it's not started, and it's also based upon, resources. If we get into a resource crunch again, these are the items that would be placed in jeopardy.
Well, I got a couple questions. What, the initial, it's like the 5th or 6th column over, initial review type, consulting, audit, compliance.
Yes.
Is that does that describe who's responsible for it? So if it says audit, that's you, if it says compliance, is that, what?
Very good question. Initially, we did, when we first rolled out the plan, we did we provided the backdrop for this in terms of how we operate as a department.
Right.
And because we're a multitude of hats, really 3 different hats, we wear a consulting hat, we wear an audit hat, we wear a compliance hat. We talked about how we would identify each particular audit so that you would understand which hat we were wearing during that, when we were doing that audit. So if it says consulting, it could be Andrew or I. It all depends. If it says audit, it's probably typically going to be me because compliance is typically going to be him,
Right.
and we're trying to create the independence.
And I can understand the audit, if you can, just like a 3-word, what is consulting? What would that review entail? I kind of get the compliance and I understand the audit. What consulting, what would that? And I hate if y'all have already gone over this.
Oh, no, no,
for 2
no,
meetings.
no, it's
Yeah.
fine. And in 3 words or less, it would be working with management to develop the policies and procedures and
Okay.
put it in place.
Okay, I got you.
Yeah, we had the issue when it first came up, like who's actually gonna draft and get documents into
Right.
place, right?
Okay.
And so, whereas compliance is a lot of, pre-activity and, internal audit is kind of more of a, testing, right? We had to actually, in many cases, do a lift and put a framework in place.
And then if you look there, David, where it says proposed scope of work, that gives you a more in-depth understanding. too.
And another question, as you mentioned that, I see, with the SOP compliance, you're suggesting we remove it. And I believe that the plan that was approved at the last meeting was kind of, it intertwined those, the SOP and the AIP pretty well. So I mean, it seems to me you'd almost, and I believe you say that in your proposed scope of work, you'd almost capture an SOP review in your AIP review when you do it.
Because there are some parts of it that may overlap.
Right. I think it's
Yes.
even more intertwined.
It's even more intertwined after
It's
last
about-
week.
Yeah, if we do the
Remember,
forward
we
looking,
made that about
absolutely.
100% overlap.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So,
Yes.
Okay, so I mean, that's,
That would be correct. Okay. Any other questions?
I mean, I guess the one question, right, just, we're talking about resourcing, right, and, the management fees and expenses, right? We've had, a big increase of hours there of a risk that is listed as moderate, right? And the consequences of that are risks that are listed as high, either being put on hold, being diminished in hours. Talk to me a little bit about why that is and.
The item that's placed on hold that's high is the AIP compliance, and it has nothing to do with resource constraints. It is included in our resources, so it would actually, if we don't do it, it actually improves our resource picture. So we plan to do all items that are high. What is the, I guess, the pivotal point for the AIP compliance is whether it's beneficial. We don't want to do an audit that is not beneficial to the organization and, and henceforth waste the time. So that's pretty much what the difference there is. So the management fees and expenses, of course, we have the high reputational risk there, but overall it is a moderate. And so we do have the resources at this current time if we get that additional resource to come on board to finish that, but as you see, it's in yellow. So it's one of those two, the moderates will be the ones at jeopardy if we don't get those additional resources. Totally risk-based. Yeah.
I apologize, am I allowed to ask questions at the committee meeting?
I'm not gonna object if you say yes.
Uh-huh.
If you say yes, I'm not gonna object, so.
I'll say yes, just because you're new, but it's
Okay,
not
good. I
normal
wanna-
standard, but Cheryl will recognize
I don't
it.
want to breach our protocol,
Sure.
I just had a couple of questions. On page 2 at the bottom, kind of have an idea from working with the people here, but management requests and administrative, I guess the management requester, those would primarily be consulting type.
Some could, yeah.
consulting that maybe wasn't captured in our original audit plan.
Right.
Administrative, what are some of the things in that book?
Some of the things are our time off, our training time, as well as any commissioner requests that we have to fulfill.
I was looking at your revised plan, and it looks like it's about half of the first year of extra time over and above what we thought. You know, it's just a good resource drain.
We don't anticipate, hopefully, next year that being the case. Smooth some things out.
Do we need a motion to amend the
Yeah.
plan?
Yeah.
All right.
So moved.
So I have a motion to second. Any discussion? Hearing none. All in favor of amending? Aye. All right.
Okay, now to segue into the fiscal year 2014 plan. Typically, this would have been the meeting that we presented that fiscal year 2014 plan at, so that we could appropriately get started on it for June. Of course, that is not before you today for a variety of different reasons. So what we are requesting is that the Audit Committee give consideration to a special meeting in which to present the plan to you, since our next meeting is not until September. We would like to present an opportunity to present the plan to you at least before we're well into fiscal year 2014. So if it pleases the committee, we'd like to put that before you to see if we can get a special meeting to do that, as well as give you an opportunity at this time to check the calendars to ensure that the rest of our meeting dates are still appropriate for the committee.
I think that makes sense.
I think it makes
I don't want
sense.
to wait till September.
All right.
And I live here, I mean, it's whatever's convenient for y'all, I can certainly.
All right, can we do that by email?
We can do that by email.
Because it's a little easier for me to be at the office and.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Okay, so we can have a special meeting?
Yeah, and I would aim probably in June,
Okay,
because I would think at that point, we'd have some updated information on some other activities.
absolutely. And
A
we'll know
little bit
better.
more what that's going to require.
Okay.
So we'll aim for.
Actually, June 19th, I'm out.
I know I'm
That's
out
right.
and
Yeah.
I'm on vacation
Okay,
again,
yeah,
so.
it's probably that week, but
Right.
that's Eva, regular schedule.
Right, I imagine probably about the second week of June, thereabouts, but I'll confirm up.
We all three have commitments on June 19th.
Okay.
So
I'll send,
I'll circle around,
yeah, I'll facilitate the coordination of the meeting. That's it.
Thank you, Monica. As part of the audit and compliance update, I wanted to go into detail in one area that our group is focusing on in regards to the compliance perspective, because I think it would be great for the audit committee not only to be on top of it, but they might have input as we progress. It's something that we're planning to send out in the next few months, so we're obviously happy to get input from the audit committee. As we discussed last meeting, we laid out a compliance framework. And the topics that we're going to discuss today are going to slowly address some of these compliance frameworks. Our compliance program, I think, is very vast. I think we're being very proactive. I think we're covering a much wider scope than many pension plan compliance departments do. I think we're trying to tackle many different parts at the same time, which I think we're comfortable with. So here is just showing that we're attacking a certain portion of it. There are other, compliance projects going on, which we'll present at further audit committee meetings, but this one I think is more pertinent just because these questionnaires are going to be going out shortly. What we're going to discuss today is two initiatives that we're working on, with the overarching theme is external management compliance. This is something that we've always done, but it's never really been a formalized procedure, and there's never been a separate compliance department to basically independently run and manage this process. So the two areas that we're going to cover today is separately managed accounts compliance, which covers policy adherence, and external manager, we call it non-custodial investments, which falls under monitoring. And we'll go into a bit more detail in regards to that. So for separately managed accounts, I'll give a little bit of background for the audit committee. These are assets where we have an external manager running them, but we have full custody. And we have full control over the investment guidelines. If we're in a commingled product, obviously we don't really have that full discretion on what the guidelines will be. But if we're in a separately managed account, we have that discretion, we have that authority. So which gives us much more ability to not only dictate the guidelines, but monitor the guidelines, because we have that daily transparency with BNY Mellon. So we're going to go at this SMA compliance from two aspects. The first aspect is a quarterly manager certification. All SMA managers which are active are going to now be attesting to compliance with the IMA and the included investment guidelines on a quarterly basis. This is an initiative that we began with at the 12/31/2012. It's something that managers are very willing to do. You just have to reach out to them. Some managers actually send these certifications out without even asking for them. Some of them wait for you to initiate. So in the early part of 2013, the February-March area, we reached out to all our managers, our separately managed account managers, and with a template to try to standardize it as much as possible, asking them to prepare quarterly certifications within 15 business days after quarter end attesting. So we had zero pushback. So I'm happy to report, all our active separately managed account managers are on board with this initiative. The emails will be sent. The certifications was sent via email, signed by a compliance officer at the manager, sent to a compliance inbox, and also sent to an operations inbox. Do you guys have any specific questions on this? Okay. So obviously, in the ideal compliance world, we also want to independently check compliance. I think it's one thing to get a manager certification, but I think if we have the ability to ensure that managers are accurately certifying that they're in compliance is great. And having that transparency through the BNY Mellon custodian accounts allows us to do that. BNY Mellon actually offers a compliance module which they can hard code in guidelines and perform monitoring, systematic monitoring. So if there's an exception, on a daily basis, you'll get an email saying, they have breached this guideline, they have breached this guideline. So we've been working with BNY Mellon over the past few months. We send them over our investment guidelines, they review them. Some of our investment guidelines are very exotic, some of them are very hard to monitor, but they were happy to report that they can actually verify compliance of 90%. So we are still in discussions with BNY Mellon on the contract side of things, but as soon as that's completed, we ideally hope to get it up and running by July 1st.
Okay, and so that 90% is 90% of the guidelines, not 90% of the
90%.
people being monitored?
No, it's all
Okay.
managers,
Okay.
90% of the guidelines.
Okay.
And just to ensure, the guidelines, which is the next bullet point, the guidelines that which cannot be monitored by BNY Mellon, we are going to independently monitor. Our risk team is actually going to do that independent monitoring. So luckily, it's only 10%, and the initial plan is to do that on a quarterly basis.
And these are SMAs.
Yeah, just SMAs, obviously, but it's a manageable number. I think the first few times through, you're going to learn, as you go.
Give me an example of an unmonitorable guideline.
Some of them are pretty exotic. I mean, I don't have them right in front of me, but some of them are in regards to specific security types, like interest-only notes that they might not be able to flag or track. It usually has to do with a specific security type, which BNY Mellon cannot flag in its system. I mean, they have no problems monitoring the very straightforward ones where we will not invest more than 5% within one holding. We will not invest in something below a certain ratings threshold. Where they get complex is when it goes to a specific security type that's relatively exotic, usually on the mortgage or the bond side. The equity side is pretty simplistic. So, but we do believe that we can monitor them ourselves. Obviously, we can't do the monitoring ourselves on a daily basis just because of the limitation of resources, but we can do it on a quarterly basis. And then we still have to remember, this is a second level. We're still getting a manager certification on a quarterly basis, which will flag any exceptions. I mean, the key is obviously, if we find an exception that's not reported by the manager, there's a problem. And that's where we'll start to investigate.
Okay.
That make sense? And the one good thing, I mean, with the BNY Mellon, and we're going to look into it, I think this is a great way to test it, is their compliance module can be used for other things. It can be used for internally managed assets. We can give them our guidelines and say, can you monitor that? We do that on the front end, but this will let us do it on a go-forward basis. They actually can monitor things on a portfolio whole level. I mean, we haven't even tested any of these things, so I think doing the SMA guidelines is the best first step, and if we're happy with it, we will look to roll it out in other compliance areas. Okay, so that covered the assembly managed accounts and custodial assets. Now we're going to cover the non-custodial assets, which, as we mentioned, are much tougher to do because we don't have that transparency, and obviously most of these vehicles are commingled funds, so we don't have the authority to say you have to follow these investment guidelines. They follow the legal document guidelines. So the best way that we think to approach tackling this is developing an annual compliance certification questionnaire. The goal is that this certification will tie with our fiscal year end. So we're going to ask them to certify to certain areas, which I'll go into detail, for fiscal year end 2013. So June 30th, 2013. So I'm working with the legal team, I'm working with the operations team, I'm working with the operations due diligence team, and also retirement system on certain questions to ensure that we're all on the same page, because this is a big project. If we're going to send a questionnaire out to all our external managers, obviously we want to not just capture compliance information, but if there's other data points that might be worthwhile, if we're going to go through the effort to send it out, why not include those other data points? So that's why we're also presenting to the audit committee, because July 1st, we're sending these all out, but the work has to be begun in June. I mean, we have to draft the questionnaires, we have to ensure that we send it to the appropriate person at the manager, we have to ensure that all the questions are applicable. Every manager is different. So the main coverage areas of these certifications is going to be compliance, which I would help draft, operations due diligence, which Sarah would help draft, and document requests. And we'll go into more detail on each of those areas. So here's a sample of compliance topics. And just to step back again, we see this as a questionnaire / certification. We don't want just responses, we want the manager certifying to these responses. I think there's a difference between reaching out to a manager over the phone and saying, are you in compliance, with the whistleblower? And versus, will you sign a certification that says you're in compliance with this? And that's what we're aiming for. We don't expect pushback from our managers, but you never know. So I mean, on a one-off basis, we will handle that when there is pushback. But at a minimum, we are going to get responses from all these managers. And then the ultimate, at the end of the day, I think, is to continue to institutionalize and can create a database. Some of this information is very helpful on the compliance side, but some of this information, it might come up down the road. We might need to know who's registered in a certain, jurisdiction. And instead of flipping through a bunch of questionnaires, we'll be able to pull up an Excel spreadsheet and say, okay, these 3 managers are registered in that jurisdiction.
You said on a one-off basis you'd handle them, you don't expect a lot of, how do you handle it if they don't or refuse to certify?
Call them. I mean, unfortunately, it's just going to be walking them through the process. I think on a go-forward basis, it's something that we've discussed with the legal department. We could side letter this, mention that this is something that we would want on a go-forward basis. But obviously, our legacy managers, we don't have that. If they have hesitation on the certification, as you said, we're doing this for all managers. We're not going to try to do it one-off, but I do expect some relations where there is a one-off, and we just have to handle them as we go. So, and I think it could be if they have a legitimate reason, we might understand. But if there's not a legitimate reason, maybe it's something that the investment team gets held to their attention, and maybe it's something that gets factored into future investment decisions. So, but I'm not going to speak for the investment team, but it could play a role in that. So, and the good thing is now with our Tamale CMS system is we'll be easily able to track these. We have a grid view, we can pull it up, show all our managers and all the certifications. So it's something that we will update the internal audit committee as we progress. So here's a sample of compliance topics to be covered in the questionnaire. And a lot of these data points we already have, it's just we don't have them certified, or we don't have them all in one spot, one go-to spot. So regulatory body oversight. We're going to ask what regulatory bodies do they have, what has oversight over the manager? SEC, CFTC, FSA, and when was the last time those regulatory bodies visited, and what was the results of those visits? Internal manager compliance procedures. Here we would get into more detail about code of ethics. Do you have a code of ethics that's required by the Investment Advisor Act? Do you have an employee training policy? Do you have a whistleblower policy that's required by Dodd-Frank? Do you have custody rules that are in compliance with SEC rules? You know, we discussed a lot of these issues on the initial and ongoing due diligence process, but once again, this will be a one-stop. And it'll be every year. So I mean, we send this one out, it'll cover July to June. Next year, we can keep the same questions, we can tweak the questions, but I think a lot of the questions will be reoccurring. So, conflict of interest, you know, this would be a good area to ask if they've done any trades through affiliated entities, you know, broker-dealer. So you could potentially ask about, you know, cross-trades, something to that effect. Compliance with legal document clauses. Some examples here are, you know, compliance with most favored nation when it's applicable, compliance with investment guidelines set forth in the agreement when applicable. Like a lot of these, there is no standard. There is investment guidelines, but they're not specific to South Carolina. They're specific to the legal document. Any questions on that? As I mentioned earlier on, another area that we plan to cover is operational due diligence questions. You know, as Mrs. Corbett's going to go into further detail later on in the meeting, we have recently launched independent operational due diligence program. You know, we have a lot of data for the operational due diligence program to sort through, but this will be another data point for them to capture that information. And why have them reach out to every single manager on their own when we're already making this effort to do it? So some potential questions that we're going to ask are key service providers. Who's your administrator? Who's your prime broker? Have they changed in the last year? Who's your auditor? We have these data points, but we don't know if they changed, you know, in the last few months. And this will ensure that we stay on top of that. And Mrs. Corbett could probably go into more detail, but some of these questions based on the response could trigger additional follow-up investigation. You know, like the compliance, if there's a certain question that raises, you know, a red flag, I will follow up. On the operational due diligence, it would be, you know, covered by the operational due diligence group. Valuation, you know, I think you're all well aware that we've recently launched in cooperation with retirement system a new valuation policies and procedures. But since this questionnaire coordinates with the end of our fiscal year end, you know, there's some very pertinent questions